The sun hung low over the horizon like a tired lantern, spilling a soft golden light across the Rio Bravo. The cowboy, a man in his 30s, fair-skinned and weathered by the sun, with a short, scruffy beard, descended the riverbank in quick, careful steps, guided by the irregular splash of water striking something that didn't sound like stone. It was a different sound, a living sound, or perhaps one on the verge of death. The cold afternoon wind bit through his worn brown leather coat. His boots slipped in the mud, yet he pressed on. Something tightened in his chest. A premonition he could neither explain nor shake, only recognize. He had felt it before, and every time had ended badly. When he reached the water's edge, his heart nearly leapt from his chest. In the rushing current, spinning like a lost log, was a girl, small, fragile, perhaps 12 or 13. Her tanned skin gleamed against the white foam, and her long black hair floated like serpents in the water. She tried to grab a rock, but the river claimed each attempt with brutal force, and on her right arm, blood mixed with water, spreading like ink in a storm. The cowboy didn't hesitate. He dropped his hat. He plunged in. The water hit him like a blow, cold enough to steal his breath, but he forged ahead, ripping against the current, his arms tearing through the water as though he were wrestling a wild animal. The girl glimpsed him for a moment, dark, wide eyes filled with fear and surrender, before being swept another yard downstream. He shouted something, but the roar of the river swallowed it. The current slammed him sideways. A rock scraped his shoulder, but he kept going, muscles burning, lungs gasping, mind focused solely on the act of swimming. When he finally reached her, she no longer fought. She just floated, half-conscious, her face pale despite the warmth of her skin. He grabbed her by the waist, pulled her close, and turned his back to the river, using his body as a shield while kicking desperately, feeling the water trying to claim them both. Minutes that felt like hours later, his boots finally hit the muddy riverbed. He didn't loosen his hold for a second. Dragging her to shore, he collapsed to his knees on dry land. She coughed up water, only a little, but she coughed. He drew a long, shaky breath, trying to reclaim his own. Hey, little lady, he murmured, gently touching her shoulder. She opened her eyes briefly, eyes intense, almost feral, yet exhausted. There was a recognition there, not of him, but of the world, as if she were returning from a place far too dark, too deep. Then she slipped back into unconsciousness. The cowboy exhaled, staring up at the sky. Night was coming. He wrapped her in his coat, lifted her in his arms, and began moving through the forest. Tall pines darkened the path, forming a tunnel of undulating shadows. Mist crawled between the roots, and his breath emerged in white clouds. She weighed almost nothing, far too little, and that worried him more than her wound. He walked without pause, listening only to the crunch of his boots, the whisper of wind, and the fading roar of the river behind them. By the time he reached the ranch, the sky had turned a deep, dark blue. The simple cabin, weathered wood, crooked roof, a single lantern glowing in the window, looked like a lone beacon in the vast desert. He laid her on the large table and removed the coat. The cut on her arm was deep, made by a blade, but that wasn't what chilled him. It was the marks around the wound, binding, as though she had escaped someone, or something. He drew a slow, steadying breath. This was not good, and it was no accident. Once again, he felt the premonition, stronger than any he had ever known. As he cleaned the wound with careful hands, the girl opened one eye, just barely. Shh, he whispered softly. You're safe now. Yet in her eyes, sharp and blade-like as they opened, there was something he couldn't understand, something that warned him he was wrong, very wrong. That night, when he finally closed the cabin door, the air itself seemed to shift. The wind stopped, the night became unnaturally still, and the cowboy felt it, the unmistakable sense that he was not alone. He didn't yet know that while he drew a deep breath and tried to shake off the premonition, fate was already moving toward him, and that someone, or many, were on their way. The cold of the forest seemed to seep into the cowboy's bones. Each step he took on the damp mud made a muffled sound, breaking the absolute silence that stretched beyond the tall trees. The Apache girl was still in his arms, unconscious, her body too light for her size, yet too heavy to ignore. Her pale brown dress clung to his arms, soaked through, and her black hair dripped water onto the wet earth. He held her tightly against his chest, feeling each uneven breath, each slight shiver, as if he could hear the blood running through her veins. The sound of the river faded behind them, but danger now seemed to surround them from all sides. Every shadow between the trees appeared to move. Every snapping branch felt like a silent warning. He knew he couldn't just carry her to the ranch. He needed to think fast, find a safe shelter before night fell completely. But the forest was not only dark, it was alive, and he felt eyes on them. Not human eyes, but intelligent ones. He adjusted his leather coat, feeling the weight of his revolver at his waist. He didn't want to fire. Not yet. The girl needed protection, yes, but she also needed safety. One wrong step, and they could be swallowed by the darkness. The twisted path between the trees seemed endless. Sharp roots threatened to trip him, and the creeping mist slipped into every crevice of the natural cabin he was trying to navigate. Then a different sound froze him, the dry snap of a breaking branch. It wasn't the river nor the leaves. It was deliberate, heavy, close. Something, or someone, was following them. He pressed the girl closer, scanning the shadows, his heart hammering in his chest. He had to decide quickly, run and risk a fall, or confront whatever lurked in the darkness. He moved forward in silence, keeping her close. Every branch, every leaf that creaked beneath his boots seemed to scream. Her irregular breathing betrayed her presence to any hunter or hidden enemy. And then, suddenly, he stopped. A subtle scent of smoke drifted through the air. Not a fire, but something burned, organic, remnants of a fire someone had used recently. A heavy premonition settled over him. He knew, without doubt, she hadn't been alone before falling into the river. Someone had been hunting her. Someone who would not rest until finding her again. Each step from then on was calculated, every movement silent. Her desperation whispered in the slight tremor of her hands against his chest, and he tried to calm himself, though his own body was tense as a drawn bowstring. The forest seemed to close in around them. Ancient trees cast twisted shadows, branches like skeletal fingers ready to grab. He felt the unsettling truth. They weren't just shadows. Something, or someone, watched their every move. He could almost hear the breathing, and for a moment, the girl moved her head, eyes half closed, staring at something outside the cowboy's vision. A shiver ran down his spine. She knew they were not alone. After a few more minutes, he finally spotted a clearing, small, sheltered by low rocks and fallen logs. Here, he could lay the girl down safely, build a small fire, and examine her wounds without drawing the attention of whoever followed them. He knelt, gently placing her on the dry ground, covering her with his coat to hold in warmth. She shifted slightly, letting out a soft groan, her eyes still closed. As he prepared an improvised shelter, thoughts raced through his mind. Who could have done this to the girl? Who had left her at the mercy of the river? And why did she bear those marks? Precise cuts and bindings that spoke of someone meticulous, cold, experienced. The cowboy knew it wasn't an accident, nor a cruel game. Someone wanted her dead, or enslaved, or worse. The wind began to rise, blowing between the trunks, stirring dry leaves and damp dust. Another snap, closer this time. He froze, hand on his revolver, ready for anything. His heart pounded, but he kept calm. He couldn't afford to be distracted. Not now. Night was falling quickly. The sky threatened to swallow the forest whole. Every sound became sharper. The wind, the branches, even the silence seemed threatening. And in the middle of it all, he knew he couldn't let fear distract him. The girl depended on him. Yet he felt that this night held secrets darker than he could imagine. Something was about to happen. Something that would change everything. And then, as if the forest itself were issuing a warning, he noticed a shadow moving among the trees. Not human, not yet visible, but intentional, watching, and the absolute certainty that whatever followed them would not let the girl survive easily. The cowboy took a deep breath, holding her tight. "Stay with me," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "I won't let them hurt you." But deep inside, a cold certainty told him that Even with all his courage, they were about to walk into the deadliest danger of their lives. The forest seemed intent on swallowing every step the cowboy took. Each branch that snapped beneath his boots felt like a silent warning, and the wind carried a whisper that seemed to repeat the girl's name. He held her tightly against his chest, feeling her still light, fragile body pressed to him. Every uneven breath she took reminded him of the urgency. Every second counted. Finally, after what felt like hours, he spotted the outlines of the ranch. The simple cabin, lit by a yellow lantern, looked small and fragile against the vast darkness of night. Yet at that moment, it was the only refuge he had. He moved quickly, each step deliberate, keeping the girl protected while the forest's shadows seemed to swallow any sense of security the world might offer. When he reached the cabin door, still out of breath, the cowboy sensed something was off. It wasn't the usual quiet of the ranch at night. There was movement, subtle, almost imperceptible, a reflection of something that shouldn't be there. He stopped, heart hammering, holding the girl closer to shield her from whatever threat lurked in the darkness. He drew a deep breath and opened the door, entering cautiously. Inside, the cabin was warm and welcoming, lit by the fire in the hearth. The scent of burning wood and lamp oil offered momentary relief, though not enough to dissipate the lingering sense of danger. The cowboy placed the girl on the large table, covering her with the still damp coat, and began carefully examining the wound on her arm. The cut was deep and precise. Marks from bindings were still visible, suggesting she had been captured before falling into the river. The cowboy furrowed his brow. Who could have done this? And more importantly, who might still be searching for her? Every movement he made was cautious, every gesture measured. He couldn't afford a distraction, not for a second. As he treated the wound, the girl slowly opened her eyes, large, dark eyes filled with fear, yet also with intelligence beyond her years. She tried to speak, but her voice failed, leaving only an inaudible whisper. The cowboy leaned close, murmuring gentle words, trying to calm her without causing more fear. Suddenly, a sound made him freeze. 3 deliberate knocks at the door, slow, heavy, intentional. The cowboy grabbed his revolver and approached, peering through the crack. The moon cast long, distorted shadows on the floor, and an unmistakable feeling settled over him. Something significant was about to happen. When he opened the door, a commanding figure emerged in the moonlight. A woman, tall and dignified, with deep bronze skin and long black hair streaked with gray, braided and adorned with beads. A traditional burnt red cloak draped her frame, decorated with blue, white, and yellow beadwork. Her eyes, deep and penetrating, fixed on the cowboy with an intensity that tightened his chest. She was the Apache matriarch. Without a word, she extended a hand toward the girl. A shiver ran down the cowboy's spine. It wasn't just respect. There was a clear message in her eyes. I know who you are and what you've done, but there's more at stake than you realize. The girl stirred slightly, as if recognizing the matriarch, and the cowboy felt a fleeting sense of relief, but instinct screamed that this wouldn't be simple. The danger that had left her at the river's mercy still lingered, and now another element was present. Someone, or something, connected to the matriarch, capable of altering the girl's fate and his own. Finally, the matriarch spoke. Her voice was firm and calm, yet carried undeniable authority. She needs protection, but protection comes at a price, and you, cowboy, will have to decide if you are willing to pay it. The cowboy swallowed hard. His body remained tense, every muscle primed for action. He knew he couldn't back down. Not now. The girl was here, vulnerable, and something within him was already tied to this destiny, as if every heartbeat had been pulled by a greater force. In that moment, the simple cabin seemed smaller than it truly was. Every shadow, every flicker of lantern light, every detail of the matriarch's cloak signaled that what was about to unfold that night would change everything. The forest behind them, the river that nearly claimed her, the unseen danger that had hunted her, they all converged on a single point, and the cowboy understood with a deep certainty that this would not be an ordinary night. It would not be a simple choice. and the girl's fate was now irrevocably tied to his, bound to ancient secrets he could not yet imagine. As the moon rose high in the sky, casting silver light over the silent ranch, the cowboy felt something he had never felt before, the weight of an unknown future, threatening yet inevitable. The girl closed her eyes, exhausted, but the tension in the air remained. The matriarch stood unmoving, watching, measuring, as if every action they took were part of a test. And the cowboy, still clutching his revolver, realized that this night would not end with words, but with decisions that could determine who survived. The suspense had only just begun. The cabin seemed safe at first glance, but the cowboy knew that feeling was an illusion. Every flickering shadow cast by the lantern reminded him of the girl's vulnerability. He watched the matriarch, motionless, as if time inside the cabin had slowed, each heartbeat echoing like a distant drum. Something was about to happen. He could feel it. Outside, the forest breathed uneasily. The wind now carried a strange metallic scent that seeped through the cabin's closed door, a warning that they were not alone. The cowboy pressed the girl closer to his chest, eyes scanning every crack in the cabin, every dark corner. "She needs to rest," the matriarch finally broke the silence. "But you need to prepare. They will come." The cowboy swallowed hard. They wasn't a vague term. It was a frozen certainty lodged in his spine. Something, or someone, had tried to kill the girl before the river. Now they were closer, tracking, watching. He drew a deep breath and examined his revolver. Every detail of the weapon, every cartridge, seemed to speak to him. "You won't fail this time." But the truth was cruel. The girl was in danger, and he had to act before any sign of their presence was discovered. While the matriarch remained silent, he realized something. She wasn't just watching, she was evaluating. Every gesture, every movement, as if testing not only his courage, but his ability to make impossible decisions. Something he still didn't fully understand. Then came the first real sign, a snap from the side of the cabin. Not a tree, not a branch. A deliberate, calculated movement. The cowboy raised his revolver, approached the door, and opened just a crack. Moonlight revealed a slender, furtive shadow moving among the nearby trees. He stayed calm, breathing slowly. Every second counted. Every breath the girl took reminded him that failure was not an option. But before he could react, a second movement caught his attention. A trail of subtle footprints in the mud around the cabin. Footprints that shouldn't have been there. The matriarch finally spoke, her voice heavy with authority and gravity. "They know where she is. You will not only run anymore, you will have to fight." A chill ran through the cowboy's body. Fight. The word resonated in his mind. And then he understood the cruel truth. This wasn't just about protecting the girl. It was about confronting something larger, something he could not yet fully see. Night advanced, each shadow growing darker, every forest sound more threatening. He quickly organized an improvised shelter inside the cabin, preparing for any attack. Every piece of furniture was strategically positioned, every entryway observed, every detail carefully planned. Meanwhile, the girl stirred, lifting her eyes slightly. She looked at the matriarch, then at the cowboy, and murmured something almost inaudible. He leaned close. "What is it, little one?" She discreetly pointed toward the window, eyes filled with fear and understanding. Something was approaching, silent but certain. The cowboy swallowed hard. The moment to act was coming faster than he expected. Suddenly, a sound of breaking branches drew nearer, followed by a distinct snap. The cowboy raised his revolver, holding his breath, and felt the matriarch shift slightly behind him, ready to intervene. But there was something in her gaze that unsettled him. It wasn't just protection. There was expectation, as if she knew this threat would bring revelations that would change everything. Then the shadow appeared partially at the window. Not an ordinary human, tall, agile, clad in dark clothing that blended with the night. He held something, or perhaps it was the weapon of a skilled hunter. But the cowboy realized immediately, this was no ordinary intruder. This was someone connected to the marks on the girl's arm, someone who would not rest until they had her. His heart raced. every muscle tensed, every sound amplified. He knew that one wrong move could be fatal, and as he prepared to face the first real threat of the night, a thought cut through his mind like a blade. The matriarch had not only brought protection, she had brought a test, and that test was about to begin. The silence before the storm was suffocating. The cowboy gripped his revolver tightly, every muscle tense, eyes fixed on the shadow moving outside the window. The girl was behind him, partially covered by the coat, watching with a mixture of fear and trust. And the matriarch remained motionless, like a living statue, her eyes piercing the darkness, measuring each moment, each breath, each intention. The intruder stepped forward again, his black clothing blending with the night, making him nearly invisible. A chill ran down the cowboy's spine. He didn't know how many there were or what their next moves would be, but he knew one thing. They could not enter the cabin alive without facing resistance. Suddenly, the shadow stopped. Then, in a swift, agile, and surprising movement, it appeared in front of the cabin door. But it wasn't alone. Behind him, more figures emerged from the darkness like ghosts of the forest. All were agile, silent, precise, and their eyes glimmered in the moonlight. The cowboy swallowed hard. He could try to shoot, but he knew they would be overwhelmed in number and speed. And it was at that moment that the matriarch did something unexpected. She raised a hand, not in attack, but in a gesture of silent command. The figures paused, hesitated. Something in her presence held them back. It was as if the ancestral authority she carried was an invisible shield, powerful enough to restrain even the most skilled hunters. Then she spoke, her voice firm and full of gravity. They came for her, but they did not come just to harm her. They came to know the truth about you. The cowboy frowned. The truth about me? He muttered, confused. The matriarch stepped closer, looking directly at him, her eyes illuminated by the lantern. Years ago, you accidentally killed my brother during a hunt. But by saving this child, you began to make amends. Now it is up to you to finish what you started. Her survival, and yours, depends on your choice. The cowboy felt the impact of her words like a punch. His past, all the guilt he carried, converged in that moment. But there was no time to dwell on regrets. He turned to the girl, who now looked at him with attentive eyes, realizing that something had changed. She knew his decision would determine everything. He drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of every second. Then he raised his revolver, not just to protect, but to declare a decision. He would not let anyone take the girl, no matter the cost. The matriarch moved outside the cabin, raising the blue and white beaded talisman she had brought, holding it between her and the intruders. A supernatural glow reflected in the moonlight, and suddenly the figures halted, retreating as if the talisman's energy restrained them. It was something ancient, magical, and the cowboy understood. She was not just a leader, she was the guardian of secrets beyond ordinary comprehension. The intruders withdrew, whispering threats and promises, but daring not to cross the line. The forest returned to its silence, the wind rustling the leaves, and the distant river resuming its normal sound. The immediate danger had passed, but the warning remained. They could return. The cowboy looked at the matriarch, both confused and relieved. "Why did you help me?" he asked. She smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, and said, "Because you chose to save innocence, even while carrying guilt. Some acts of kindness have the power to change destinies. But remember, this child is not just a girl. She carries the future of our tribe." The girl, now fully conscious, gave a small smile. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now shone with confidence. The cowboy felt a mixture of relief and responsibility he had never known before. He understood that from this moment on, life would never be the same. He was no longer just a protector. He was part of something greater, something that would transcend his own story. As the moon illuminated the silent cabin, the cowboy finally comprehended the plot twist that would change everything. The danger that had pursued her was not merely physical, but symbolic. She was the key to the survival of her culture, and he, unknowingly, was destined to protect her. The forest returned to absolute silence, as if breathing along with them. And for the first time, the cowboy felt something he never imagined he would: true hope.